Hello everybody, my name is Nick Starwind, and today we'll be looking at something a little differently compared to usual. And instead of doing like 4 in one go or something, I'll just be doing these between other videos, because clearly my channel is thriving with activity. So recently, I've been doing some narrations for the Sodor Island Forum, which is a fan page for Thomas the Tank Engine. And there was always something that bugged me as a child when watching the classic series, and as I got older, I read more of the books and learnt more about the series, which led me to finding out that there was actually a reason for this weird feeling. What many people outside the fanbase don't know is that there are a lot of missing stories from the second series of the show, and one of them annoyed me to hell when I found out because it was actually kind of important to the continuity of specific characters. So today, rather than reviewing an episode or film, I thought we would look at this particular mystery and essentially review the pros and cons to why it became the infamous lost text that we know about today. Because contrary to popular belief, this stuff happens all the time, but in this case, and many others I may talk about in future, would have benefited aspects of the text we are discussing. So join me as we enter the Starwind Zone. Call waiting, looking to collect. An essay never written. An application never completed. But for some reason the job obtained. A man in his 30s, grasping at the last chance to connect to a younger audience. But for some reason keeps making references to a show no one has watched for 50 years. Putting a pog in the jukebox of nostalgia, and calling the repairman from the Starwind Zone. Don't worry, this isn't a new intro, just a little joke. So before we go into the specifics, let's talk about that famous little blue engine, Thomas the Tank Engine. Thomas the Tank Engine is the series about a mythical island of Sodor, located in the Irish Sea between England and the Isle of Man, where the inhabitants are talking steam engines that have various adventures while under the watchful eye of the head of the railway, Sir Topham Hatt, or more commonly known as the Fat Controller. Written by the Reverend W. Awdry, the original stories were first published in books titled The Railway Series, which saw publication from 1945 until 1972, until the series was taken over by his son, Christopher Awdry, from 1983 until 2011. Despite the ongoing publications of the books, aside from a failed BBC attempt in the 50s, a proper television series wasn't proposed until 1979, when Britt Orcroft bought the rights to the stories and began adapting them with David Mitton, who had previously worked on many Gerry Anderson productions as a special effects technician. Now, added with what we are talking about today, the first attempt at adapting the series back in the 50s is a total mystery in itself. There is very little on what actually happened, except that the BBC wanted to adapt 2 stories and in the process managed to botch up the first one by having the train derail live on television, only for a hand to loom in, like the glove from Smash Brothers, and put it back on the tracks. So that dream ended pretty quickly. Another slice of mystery pie is the pilot episode for the series in 1983. Now, most people think that Thomas and Gordon was the first episode, but actually Down the Mine was made for the test screenings to see what worked. Currently the footage of said episode hasn't been found yet, and all we know of its existence is this brief clip from the remade episode where the test model of Thomas was used to transition from one area to the other. So already we have 2 mysteries on the tally for this series, and we haven't even reached the one I've chosen, so we are already beginning to see that no one is good at keeping a hold of footage as soon as it's no longer needed. But let's continue. So the first season flies by in 1984 and is a complete success for the series, and they are greenlit for a second for 1986. By this point, they've had to move studios, upgrade the sets and pick new stories, added with being written new ones by Christopher Awdry to coincide with a new book being published. Now, aside from a few episode ideas being thrown out, such as Gordon Goes Foreign, and one being moved to later seasons, such as Percy's Promise and Time for Trouble, one of the new introductions to the series were a collection of characters such as Duck, Diesel, Daisy, Boko, Trevor, and 2 twin engine pairs, Bill and Ben, and Donald and Douglas. Bill and Ben appeared in the mainline Engines book and had them adapted for the series, coinciding with the introduction of Boko, added with short roles in Percy Takes the Plunge, Wrong Road and Edward's Exploit, but still firmly integrated into the Thomas world. Donald and Douglas, however, was a bit more rushed. Despite having a book to themselves with a more in-depth storyline, in the series it was cut down to 2 episodes and their introductions rushed. For those who don't know, or don't care, let me explain Donald and Douglas's story. The island is becoming very busy with more and more people visiting, most likely after the success of Thomas and his friends going to London to be on exhibition. To help with the new workloads and passenger trains, the Fat Controller sends for one engine to help Duck in the yard. What actually happens though is that 2 identical engines arrive called Donald and Douglas, who play dumb to which one was actually asked to come out of fear, and because they are identical and have no numbers, claiming to be lost along the way, the Fat Controller has no choice but to give them a trial and decide which one to send back. Later we find out that it is in fact Douglas that wasn't meant to arrive and is terrified of going home because he will be scrapped. So does his best to work hard and ensure they can both stay. After some mishaps and confusion though, the twins do redeem themselves and are allowed to stay on the island. The story of Donald and Douglas coincides with during a period in history where the use of steam trains were coming to an end thanks to what is called the Beechings Report, which saw diesels as the more efficient and steam outdated, which led to many engines being scrapped and many railway lines being shut down. During this time, many people feared the loss of such historical trains, so many of them were preserved by different societies and others were sometimes hidden and forgotten, hence why Douglas finds asylum on the island of Sodor because no one is looking for him, so he doesn't fear anyone coming to find him, but being sent back would be worse. The Scottish twins have more significance to the social commentary than Bill and Ben do, as their future is already secured and don't have to work as hard. So the main question is, how was that translated onto television? Originally it was supposed to be a 3-act structure similar to Duck and the Diesel, adapting all 4 stories, combining Hello Twins and the missing coach into one episode, leaving Brake Van and the Deputation to follow. Seems pretty logical and straightforward. Well, it turns out it wasn't. In an interview with David Mitten for the Sodor Island Forum, despite scripts being written, sets prepared and shooting beginning and running smoothly, Britt Orcroft was having trouble justifying the use of the first episode of the arc, The Missing Coach, as she believed that children would find it too complicated, not taking into account that it was already in book form and had no issues when you had limited imagery to go by, so essentially using the visual medium would in fact make it even clearer compared to the book, but she didn't seem to believe that. So why would The Missing Coach be so complicated? Well, let me tell you the story to see if you struggle. So after the arrival of Donald and Douglas, the Fat Controller gives them numbers to tell which engine is which, but only puts them on their tenders, which the twins acknowledge in a cheeky way. They are later put to work in the yard with Duck, and they interact with the other engines as well. We then find out for the first time that Thomas has a special coach, which is for people connecting from Gordon's mainline express to his branch line, and that this coach needs to be put on a different platform for when Thomas arrives. However, because Douglas is so paranoid about being found out, he accidentally puts that coach with the other coaches in the sidings out of the way, which causes the usual confusion and delay. Now, of course you don't find that confusing at all, seems pretty standard stuff, but here is the reason why she didn't like the episode. Because Douglas is so frightened of getting into trouble, Donald offers to take the bullet for him, but realising they may get found out, they decided to swap tenders, and Douglas takes a goods train Donald was ready to take. Cut a long story short, the Fat Controller is psychic and calls Donald out, and both engines get into trouble. And that is it? Wait, I think I've got that wrong. Is that wrong? Why are you looking at me? Well, is it wrong? I don't know. Let me check. Lazy digital bastard. Right, here we go. Oh, big books, big book PlayStations, right. Nah. Huh. So Donald and Douglas swap tenders, and Donald takes the goods train with Douglas's tender, while Douglas remains where he is with Donald's tender, and then the Fat Controller catches him out. Okay, maybe a tad confusing when you write it down, but it's not that confusing, is it? You've heard worse, it's not exactly Inception. This reason is why Britt Orcroft decided last minute, which was halfway through filming, to abandon this episode and instead replace the episode slots with Thomas, Percy and the Coal, which became the first episode of the series instead, although this hasn't been confirmed and is debated among people, even though logically it is set in the same location and quicker to film then. Seeing as the establishing two stories were now deducted from the arc, all you had left was Breakvan and the Deputation, which is kind of like only making dirty work and close shave without the context of Pop Goes the Diesel. Breakvan is supposed to be very suspenseful, due to the cliffhanger of the previous episode, where both engines want to do their best, but no matter how hard they try to redeem themselves, they keep screwing everything up, essentially cancelling each other out on who's the worst engine, giving the Fat Controller a tough time deciding. Now, this episode only works in a 3-act structure, because you have the causality from the missing coach, which creates the tension that makes Breakvan so good, concluding it with the happy ending that is the Deputation, where they are both allowed to stay. However, despite this problem, it was overlooked and the 2 episodes were made with this very short introduction in Breakvan.
Donald and Douglas are twins and had arrived from Scotland to help the Fat Controller, but only one engine had been expected. The twins meant well, but did cause confusion. The Fat Controller had given them numbers, Donald 9 and Douglas 10, but he was still planning to send one engine home.
This intro gives us a vague hint that they are confusing people, not exactly telling us anything or making us feel anything for these characters or even understanding their plight, as the subject of scrapping engines wasn't mentioned until Deputation, so before that it's just, I'm going to send one engine home, and we are supposed to feel bad about it when we don't know how bad that really is. So after all this, what happened to the missing coach missing episode? What happened to the footage? How much was filmed? How did we find out it existed?
Who is Eric Cartman's father?
And will it ever be found or adapted in some way to amend this gap? Well, let's begin with what we have in terms of evidence of his existence. So from what we know about the missing coach actually existing, aside from documented accounts from David Mitten and Britt Orcroft, as discussed in interviews, we first have these recycled shots from Breakvan at the very beginning, which were originally going to be used in the previous episode as part of the main chunk of the story. First one being used to most likely see the twins lying to the Fat Controller in Hello Twins, and the second one from the missing coach, where the engines are given numbers and then discussing the idea of swapping tenders for a laugh. On top of this footage existing, there is a handful of promotional photography from the cancelled episode, which was distributed all over the world to be used in books, magazines, posters, video games, and all sorts of merchandise. Japan, being the legends that they are, were responsible for a lot of these images being found, and as you can see from the settings, it tells a clear story of just how much was filmed. So this first image I found was on a Japanese PS1 game titled Kikansha Thomas to Nakamatachi, which is again from the opening scene of Breakvan, but at a lower angle, most likely as an establishing shot for the characters. These 2 images were found in magazines and card games, clearly depicting the engines being introduced to Duck and then working together happily. Now this image was discovered most recently from Japan, which shows the scene in which the twins confront Gordon and Henry for mocking their whistles. This is actually one of the first I ever saw of the episode existing, which shows the moment where Douglas is having his panic attack over being found out while shunting the coaches away, including the special coach. Although there are more images unearthed than what I have shown, in terms of building a sense of story, the Japanese trading card here is the final one where clearly Donald has just swapped tenders with Douglas and is lying to the Fat Controller about everything. So let me get this right. If each episode is 4 minutes and 30 seconds long, and they had pretty much filmed the station yard, station interior, and shed sequences, which would most likely be a couple of days of filming, that means they had only really had to film the sequences talking about the special coach, and Thomas pulling it along and interacting with Donald and Douglas briefly. Maybe some close-up of the twins' whistles and then a large sculpt of them, but I bet it would make up about 30 seconds, 1 minute tops. So looking at that, that is nearly 90% of an episode done, and you just dropped it to start fresh on a whole new episode because one person said it may be complicated for kids. Can you imagine how much time and money was wasted because of that decision? Why didn't you just bite the bullet yourself and finish the episode? Slap it in the right place, still film Thomas, Percy and Nicole, and if that was the replaced episode, just scrap one of the more boring ones, such as Better Late Than Never. Seriously, I would rather had more of an extended story arc for the twins than a story about traffic being slowed down by construction on the bridge, ending in a lame friendship moral. You even missed out the climax of the Cole story anyway, where the feud continues until Thomas gets stranded and has to be rescued by Percy to amend the quarrel. Oh yeah, I also like how the US named it Double Trouble, like it was a coincidental jab to the cut episode. This whole episode being missing kind of strikes a nerve because it's a continuity problem and an inconsistency with the show, because in Breakvan it says,
The twins meant well, but did cause confusion. The Fat Controller had given them numbers, Donald 9 and Douglas 10.
but yet we don't know why they are confusing, so giving them numbers isn't justified in the final arc of the story when the Fat Controller says,
But your names will be painted on you. We'll have no more mistakes.
what mistakes are these? Because if we look at certain scenes from Breakvan and Deputation, they have names clearly displayed on their sides. So you did a good job at masking that old issue too. This even continues into season 3 in the episode Escape, when Edward comments to Douglas about his fear of the scrapyard, which again was only mentioned in the missing coach, so saying you have something in common is redundant. While we're on the subject, I love the fact that accidentally hitting a signal box in the yard and destroying a brake van that's causing problems is a viable offence to send someone away when so many of your current engines have done far worse and not even by accident. The missing coach gives weight to that because Douglas isn't paying attention and messes up, and instead of owning up to it, lies further, putting Donald in the as well, adding to Douglas obviously running away to live on that island and causing the problems in the first place. I know this is going off track. Track. And yeah, and it isn't as big a deal as it should be, because I know you adults out there are going, oh, it's a kids show, why are you so mad? To which may I just add, go yourself. I hate when people use that as an argument. Just go back to Love Island and let your brains melt. Now let's just bring this back. So where is the rest of the footage? And are we ever going to see it? Well, both answers are, we have no idea. Several sources have claimed that David Mitten and Britt Orcroft have the original rushes and screen tests from the episode itself. But after David Mitten passed away, we have no idea what came of his belongings related to the series, and Britt Orcroft has been very quiet about it, or just hasn't been asked about it. And in all fairness, her being in her 70s, she may not be so concerned about such matters like some in the fanbase are. So unless someone makes some sort of discovery, we may never actually see this footage, which is a shame really. So seeing as we have all this information, these clips and photographs, it may seem like we will never be able to see the complete story. The CGI series has long since departed the Railway series adaptations, aside from the small railway engines, and despite reintroducing the twins back into the series, they have just been shelved as fast as they were introduced in favour of tried and tested methods of heavily toy promotion. Especially now, where we seem to be travelling around the world and fading classic characters into the background. but where the model and computer series have abandoned and gone far away from the point, you, the wonderful people on the internet, have not failed us, for you have found many different ways to bring in this story to screen. In terms of the audio existing for the story, Willie Rushton's narration from the 80s is well used as it is the most commonly known version, and another is the 2000s recordings by series narrator Michael Angelis, which although is the most clear and closer to making a series version, it's read very slow and not very enthusiastically compared to Willie Rushton, who puts a lot more energy into the role.
Douglas offered to take away Gordon's coaches. Douglas was enjoying himself when an awful thought struck him. I hope the Fat Controller doesn't find out I shouldn't be here. I couldn't abide going back. He worried so much over this that he forgot about Thomas's special coach.
He pushed it with the others into the carriage siding, then ambled along to join Donald at the water column. As he went, Thomas scampered by, whistling cheerfully. Soon Thomas came fussing. "Where's my coach?"
Yeah, I know which one I would be using. But using these narrations and the original recorded ones from the fans on the internet, multiple recreations have been made over the years, whether it's Ertl Toys, Tamika World, Wooden Rail, Bachman, and as graphics have gotten better, train simulators with modded trains which just get better and better with time. My personal favourite so far is one done by YouTuber Mainland Studios, who adapted it in the style of the original series, including a missing clip to depict it being unfinished. Coincidentally, they have also adapted one of the narrations I have done, so that was fun to find out. And that is the mystery of the missing coach, added with my blunt opinion. I hope you enjoyed this look into this and other mysteries surrounding an internationally famous series. Here is hoping something comes of it in future. Maybe we should do a hashtag like, I don't know, hashtag find the missing coach on Twitter or something and see what happens. But maybe it'll just be a forgotten piece of media like many others I hope to cover in future. But until then, I've been Nick Starwind, you have been my audience, and before I go I shall leave you with my own recording of Hello Twins and the Missing Coach. But until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, stick it on a badger, attach it to a brick, mail it to a bomb because they'll like a surprise, you know, that's how they are, and I shall see you next time.